Hey guys, welcome back. I've got another video here. We've watched her before, Catherine War. This is actually a subscriber suggested video, but it is 1895 and all that, the birth of rugby league. Um, I think the video that we watched of her previously, it was about coal mining. She did a really good job. She seemed young to me. I'm not sure how old she is or how this looks like this was actually 6 years ago. But she did a fantastic job. So I'm sure this one will be great. But yeah, let's go ahead and get it started. I will link this video in the description, guys.
In England, rugby league never left its cradle. It still lies landlocked in three northern counties: the coal and heavy woolen area of Yorkshire, the mill towns of Lancashire, and the dockland of Cumberland.
Whoa, I think we should move on from these outdated stereotypes about the North and rugby league. Looking at you, the person who brought a ferret into a Castleford game. Anyway, rugby league is no longer the exclusive pastime for pit monkeys from Wigan. It's played all over the world, in exotic locations like France, Canada, the Pacific, and even London. But where did it all start? Well, to find that out, I'm going to the one place where it was born, Huddersfield. Let's start by going back to the history of rugby. Now, we've all heard the famous story of how rugby was invented when William Webb Ellis, a schoolboy at rugby school, picked up the ball during a football match and ran with it, thus inventing the sport. However, this was probably complete rubbish. Games like this have been played in the British Isles for hundreds of years, and different public schools all had their different and competing versions of the game. Rather, the first codified rules of the sport were written down at rugby school in 1845. The reason why the story of William Webb Ellis probably became popular was because it legitimised the rugby school rules as the proper and official ones. You see, all the different public schools had different versions of the game and they're all trying to make their version the proper one. So by having a convenient creation myth which invented the sport, the rugby school could now lay claim to having their rules as being the official, authentic and original ones. Ex-pupils of rugby school later went on to found rugby clubs where they could continue to play the sport. The first schism came with the creation of the Football Association in 1863. The clubs who formed it preferred a game focused on kicking and dribbling rather than running and handling. In response, the Rugby Football Union was formed in 1871. It's important to note that all the founding member clubs were from either London or the home counties and had played the sport at public school. The sport soon spread to the north where it became hugely popular. In fact, it was so popular that Yorkshire had more rugby clubs than anywhere else in the country. There was a huge influx of working class players from Yorkshire, Lancashire and Cumbria. The Yorkshire County Club, later the Yorkshire RFU, was founded in 1869 by the oldest clubs in Yorkshire: Bradford, Leeds, Huddersfield, Hull and York. In 1877, the Yorkshire Cup was created, the first competitive knockout-style cup in the UK. Although the concept of competing for a prize was hugely popular with the players and spectators of Yorkshire, it really riled up the RFU because it railed against their core value, amateurism. Amateurism was a classic Victorian public school value. It was a belief that sport should be played for pleasure, not profit, and that any money given to players would turn them into greedy, dishonest players who only cared about winning. As such, any payments from clubs to players were banned. Yorkshire was the first to implement amateurism rules in 1879. The RFU would follow in 1886. This was difficult for the working class players who had to cover all their expenses themselves and often had to take time off work to train or play. As a result, some clubs began to offer broken time payments, which were wages given to players to compensate for the time off work. However, this was considered professionalism by the RFU and strictly.
Yeah, amateurism, that sounds like, I don't know. I don't see how that was beneficial for the players. Obviously, it's done now, but I feel like that would be an idea by somebody higher up to keep from having to pay people, right? I don't know, but I guess it was before that.
Banned. It's important to note, however, that the RFU often took a blind eye to payments. It just depended who was being paid. Teddy Bartram, a Wakefield Trinity player, had been receiving payments since 1879, but he was banned for life by the RFU. This is despite the fact that the 1888 England team all were paid as well, yet none of them were punished. One critic in 1909 complained, "The RFU turn out bag and baggage all players who wish to be recompensed for loss of working time and consequent loss of wages, and the next day are willing to allow sums of 12 shillings or 21 shillings a week for what are euphoniously described as personal and petty expenses. What is professionalism in a working man is evidently something very different in a player of slightly superior social status." Support for these broken time payments continued to grow throughout the 1890s, and in 1893 a number of northern clubs complained that they were vastly underrepresented in the leadership of the RFU. This meant that all their proposals would get voted down, and when they proposed that broken time payments be legalised, this was refused. Shortly after, many clubs were suspended for professionalism. It was only a matter of time before they'd start to break away.
Yeah, it's crazy that we're still dealing with issues like this now because, like, over here, if you play American football in college, it's just been in the last 10 years. Like, they were using these kids' likenesses for video games. They're selling jerseys, and none of these kids were getting anything for it. And now they've started nil, and it's completely flipped. So not only are they getting payments from that stuff, which they rightfully should, these kids can kind of pick and choose where they want to go through like a transfer. I don't follow college football, so I'm not super familiar with this, but they can like go through a portal, and kind of select the school they want, which I think is mostly based off of who's going to pay them the most. Some of them still do it, based on where they think that they're going to have a shot starting, or where they might be most likely to go to be able to get picked in the draft. But some of these quarterbacks, some of these really good receivers that are in college are making more money playing in college than they would in the NFL. Um, so it's pretty wild how it's completely flipped in the last 10 years of these kids getting nothing to getting so much money. So kind of what we're seeing as far as looking at from like the NFL is, which is beneficial in ways, but you're getting these kids that are staying in college longer. Um, so probably the last 2 or 3 years, you're getting quarterbacks coming out that, especially with COVID too, that have played for 6 years or so. So they have a lot more experience, and they're kind of coming out of the gates running. They're doing really well. The game's not like too fast for them because they've kind of done it for so long. But I mean, it's just crazy to. I mean, and now you're on the other side of it, of where they're getting so much money. So, like, I think there was even a kid last year that declared for the draft and then ended up staying in college, because he got like a deal from somewhere else. But where they were getting nothing, which they should have been paid for their likeness getting used for jersey sales, using their name and all that stuff. They should have absolutely got a portion of that. But no, it's just like they're getting so much money, and they're coming out. And we saw really a couple of them, but one guy comes to mind right now that just completely bombed all of his interviews with NFL teams coming out of college because he was so arrogant that this this kid who, and it also has to do with his name and who his dad is, I think, but that he went from what everybody kind of thought he was going to go in the first round to he didn't even get picked till the fifth. So a lot of people are saying, "Oh, it's a conspiracy against him or whatever." When if a team had an opportunity to draft a guy that they thought was going to be a good quarterback, they would do it. Like, there's not a conspiracy. It was because inconceivably that well, actually, it was two things. It was one, the arrogance and just bombing interviews because he felt like he was too good to have to even talk to these teams. But two, it was also just his name and the entourage that came with him of that he was going to be a backup to start. He wasn't going to come in and start any football team. And him drawing so much attention as a backup is not the thing that teams want. They don't want to have to deal with answering questions about a backup. So, yeah, it's kind of a mess of how quickly it just flipped.
Here at the George Hotel in Huddersfield that in 1895 22 clubs decided to break away from the Rugby Football Union and form the Northern Union. Rugby League was born. The RFU came down hard on this and banned any RFU clubs from playing against the Northern Union. In addition, any player who had played for Northern Union teams were now banned from playing in the RFU for life. However, I want to make one thing clear. This wasn't a geographical issue. It wasn't North versus South. It was about class. Frank Marshall, who was headmaster of Almondbury Grammar School in Huddersfield, was one of the fiercest inquisitors against players who had received payments. He even suspended his own club, Huddersfield. And this is what he had to say. The working man player has not taught us anything in the way of style or skill in playing the game. Physique and stamina above the average he undoubtedly has, but to say that he knows more about the game than when he was being brought up in the best traditions of the public schools and the universities is absurd. If the case against the RFU couldn't get any more damning, this is an extract from an official letter sent by them in 1906. The game of rugby football has always been at its best when good players were available from our public schools, and the more public school men get to play our game, the better we are certain it is for it. Before the split, clubs in Yorkshire, not including schools and universities,
Wouldn't it have just got to the point where players didn't want to play for them? Like if they could go somewhere that was, well, I guess it didn't matter if it was based on class. They wouldn't have really had the opportunity, I suppose.
formed 35% of the total number of clubs in the RFU. After the split, there were just 3%. So that's how the Northern Union was formed. But how did the sport actually evolve into the one we recognise today? Well, the process began a long time ago. As early as 1892, the suggestion was made to reduce the number of players from 15 to 13. This was not, however, considered as a rule until 1906. The line-out was removed in 1897, and in 1906 the play-the-ball rule was introduced. Previously, a scrum had to be formed every time a player with the ball had been tackled. This significantly speeded up the pace of the game and made it more viewer-friendly, as often the ball was hidden from view during the scrum. Perhaps the most famous aspect of rugby league, the limited tackle rule, was introduced in 1966, with each team allowed only 4 tackles. This came about as a result of a match between Huddersfield and Hull Kingston Rovers, during which Huddersfield only touched the ball twice during the entire first half. So that's been a very brief history of rugby league. I hope it's been somewhat informative for you, and hope to see you again soon.
That was good. I wish it kind of would have gone more into kind of what happened after that, but really good. Just with everything, they single people out. If you're not of high class or rich or whatever, then you're just never gonna be as good. It's basically kind of what they were saying. You shouldn't be paid because you're never gonna be as good as somebody who's brought up that way. So stupid. Um, but yeah, Catherine, she did a great video. She always does. I think I've got another one saved that a subscriber suggested from her. So we might have to do that one soon here too. But really good video. I love seeing that old footage of them playing sports and the stuff that they would wear. Um, I know here when they would start American football, I think they used to call them the leather hats because they would wear the leather helmets, and some of the clothes are just hilarious. Think of why that was chosen for it. But like I said, really good video. I will link it in the description as usual. You will also find a link there for my Patreon and a link of how you can become a member here the channel on YouTube. But yeah, I hope you guys have an awesome, awesome day.